So God of creation, give thanks tonight. Thanks for bringing each of us together to hear and to contemplate and to ask questions and to just think about the ways in which we might better care for your creation, for our earth, for our home. We confess that we don't always, each and every one of us, each and every day, do what is best for your creation. But we also know that we keep trying. So we ask that you would bless us in this conversation, that you would keep our minds and our hearts open so that we might know how to best take action. So be with us in this time. It is in your name we pray. Amen. So I will say, sort of on behalf of Justice in Action at Asylum Hill Congregational Church, we are thrilled to be able to present tonight a program on that has been titled Action Steps on Climate Change, Saving God's Creation. I know that many of you, if you are anything like me, and you watch the news and you see all that's happening, you may be dismayed right now at the state of the world, at what is happening. And I think for me, I will just sort of admit myself, I often find myself feeling really sort of helpless, like feeling helpless, like not knowing exactly what I should be doing or how I should be kind of out in the world, especially when it comes to climate change. And there's just a real sense of it. It feels very large to me. It feels like a big issue that feels very difficult and complicated, and often it goes, often it even the language is a language that I don't speak or understand all the time, and so it feels sort of out of my hands. And so I think tonight is really important. It's an important conversation because it's a conversation with people like us, who really are going to kind of just help us to understand that climate change and taking action in terms of justice for climate change. It's not as it's not as daunting as it might seem. So we're really excited. Thank you both Mally and Mark for being with us tonight. Mally and Mark are two activists, and they are really gonna share with us tonight specific action steps that we can take as a community to make Connecticut more resilient and less contributive to the problems that we face in terms of climate change. I would say Mally is an AHCC member and has 15 plus years experience representing funders in the environmental space. And Mark Scully is co-founder of the People's Action for Clean Energy, or PACE. you, Mally, some folks before you, before some of the folks were getting on, you were talking about being an author and about Case for Heaven. And Mally has 3 books, including The Case for Heaven. And she has, for the last 20 years, focused her business on helping family foundations create impact and joy in their philanthropy, principally in arts and in the environment. Mally and Jim, who is also on this meet, and all of their family members are members of Asylum Hill Congregational Church. And Mally definitely says she doesn't want to brag, but she will tell you that her 2 grandchildren are nearly perfect. As I said, Mark is the president of the nonprofit People's Action for Clean Energy and is actively engaged in promoting Connecticut's transition to clean, renewable energy. Mark retired in 2017 from a 35-year career as an actuary. And from 2018 to 2020, he oversaw the restoration of a local historic mansion, you might know the Ensign House in Simsbury, into a mixed-use commercial property using modern energy, efficient technology, and practices. And also, as Mark was saying at the beginning of our conversation, he lives in West Simsbury, Connecticut, and he is actually a member of First Church of Christ Simsbury, where my colleague and friend George is in ministry. So welcome, Mally, welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time and for being with us and just engaging all of us in this really important conversation tonight.
Thanks. I think Mark and I flipped a coin and I get to go first. I will speak for about 15 minutes and he will speak for much longer because he has much more to say. I realized recently something that all of you intuitively know, which is that there are more than 10 ways to be an environmentalist. You can be involved in water pollution or air pollution, toxins, PFAS, regenerative farming, air, solar panels, windmills, pollinator gardens. The list goes on. And that has been as it should be, because there are many, many different ways to care for God's creation. And it's wonderful that each of us can find where we are most spiritually drawn. But we're in the middle of a climate change crisis. And I think that means that the calculus has changed. So I'm going to share my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. And we'll begin. Share. No, that's not the right place to begin. Okay, and now I have to get rid of the view and read. Oh, Mark, tell me again the other way to do it.
I think you're in review. You need to go to view.
Oh, okay, go to view. Yep. And go to read. Go to read. Reading view. There we go. Okay.
Look at you.
I know, that's the first time I've ever done that. The first thing I want to talk about is that I confess that even with being a advisor to family foundations who are deeply involved in environmental work, I am in what has been called the movable middle. The movable middle is a notion that comes out of Canada that says that most of us believe in climate change, but we're not doing a whole lot about it. And I will confess that I was the same. I could not have told you a climate policy that I could advocate for. And I spent a very irritating to myself and to others, trying to convince managers of restaurants that they needed to stop handing out plastic straws. I was in a very small space about the environment. And that has changed for me. And I want to tell you about that transition and hope that I can help you move out of the movable middle and into being a climate activist. I think there are a lot of reasons for the movable middle. I think they include not knowing what to do and a feeling of helplessness that Erica talked about, and hopelessness that anything can be done. And I am hoping to convince you that there is lots to be done. I retired last March, and as I was retiring, the NRA was falling apart. And that meant that there were a lot of articles and a couple of books that I read, and I was shocked by them. I was shocked to find out that the NRA has fewer than 4 million members, whereas the Pew Research Institute has discovered that there are 20 million people for whom climate change is their most important issue. That's the only slide that I will read this evening, but it's because I want us to sit with it for a moment. Think of it. You all know what the NRA stands for, what it wants, and what it gets. And that's because it's a single-minded voice with only one issue, which it hammers on over and over and over. And meanwhile, all these lovely environmentalists are doing all their different things without focusing on the emergency of our time. And I think we need to change that. I knew that I needed to change that. It was a game changer for me. I may have retired, but I realized that my work in this field was not done, that I needed to spend at least 2 years creating a portfolio of strategies to combat climate change. I would use Connecticut as a pilot project. Some ideas would fail, some would succeed. And the hope was that at the end of 2 years, I would have a portfolio of strategies that we could hand to other states. My North Star in this work was 2 things. There would always, always, always be a focus on the climate change emergency, nothing else. And every single thing we did could create an action step. I was done with reading long articles in the Times about what was going on and movies that described how terrible it was. I wanted action. And that's what I want to give to the funders that I have hornswoggled into working with me, and the nonprofits that have also joined our team. So we started thinking about a postcard. The governor of our state is a good guy, and I think he means well, and I think he actually believes in the necessity of climate work. But he keeps giving away climate legislation as a bargaining chip for other things that he wants. So in July, he gave away climate legislation to pass a budget. And in August, he gave away climate legislation in order to get the pandemic powers that he thought he needed. Now, both of those 2 things are honorable and good things, but he can't keep kicking climate change down the road. And so we, with the help of the Connecticut Citizens Research Group and Sierra Club, we created a beautiful postcard, which 12 nonprofits all sent to their members. Now, the great thing about this list is that it includes some of the biggest nonprofits in the environmental space in Connecticut and some of the littlest. And it includes a healthy representation by eco-justice groups, the NAACP, Bridgeport Generation Now, to make sure that we really represent the whole spectrum of Connecticut, not just good middle-class people that like to go for walks in the woods. And so we sent out a postcard to the membership of all these organizations, and we got 4,000 postcards back. I should tell you, for those of you who are in justice groups in other situations, that I went on a webinar by Activate America to see if postcards were actually any useful. And this group said, come on our webinar and we've got research. And they thought that probably 50 people would show up. 485 people showed up for the webinar. They were utterly flustered and thrilled, and they did indeed have rigorous double-blind research out of the University of Wisconsin that proved that a postcard, if it has a personal message, is helpful and will move the needle with legislators. So we did that, and 4,000 and counting postcards are going to be arrayed on the lawn of the State House on November 4th, a week from tomorrow. And at 1:30, all 4,000 of them will be collected and carried into the governor's office. And every single one of them has a personal message from people all over Connecticut saying you must do more about climate change. But obviously, doing a postcard is not enough. I want you to do the postcard. I would love to have you do it. There's the link if you want to go on it. But that's not going to really get you off the movable middle. So what else can you do? I would like to suggest that you look at something, a nonprofit called Sustainable Connecticut. Mark works with them. A collaborative of funders started them 5 years ago that I was part of. And it's a wonderful, robust nonprofit at this point who has registered 129 towns out of 169 towns to do things for the town economy, equity, and the environment. Now, the really cool thing about Sustainable Connecticut is that if you decided that, for instance, you wanted bike paths to go through your main street, you could call Sustainable Connecticut, and once you're a registered town, and I think most of all of you are, they will give you the technical support to forecast how much it's going to cost and what you need to do in order to create a bike path through the center of town. You then are given the option of crowdsourcing your project. So let's say that bike paths through the center of town is going to cost $15,000. You would put up a crowdsourcing for $7,500. And when you met that goal, Sustainable CT, through a wonderful funder, who I haven't gotten permission to name, so I'm not going to right now, will provide the matching funds to have you fulfill your project. This is amazing. This means that there are all kinds of projects that Mark Scully is going to tell you about tonight that you're going to think, what can I as an individual do? Well, you don't have to do it as an individual. You can go on Sustainable CT and they will tell you the first steps. They will get you the technical support you need, and then they will help you raise the funds. So I will have to admit, I've put the website link at the bottom of this slide. I find their website confusing. Go to it, cruise around, see what you can find. And if you get confused, just call them up. They're great people and they'll answer your phone call. So the biggest thing you can do, I think, is to advocate for policy. And right now we have a very important initiative that is in front of the legislature and needs to be passed by the end of December. This is the piece of legislation that the governor pushed down the calendar because of his budget and then for pandemic powers. But we only have one last chance. It looks like there's going to be a special session in December for the Transportation Climate Initiative, and it is our best chance to lower emissions in Connecticut. I need to explain that RGGI is a wonderful carbon tax method that is already in place in Connecticut for our stationary emissions content. And there, the emissions of stationary emission creators is going down, but the emissions from transportation is going up. Right now, transportation counts for 35% of all the emissions in Connecticut. We have a terrible record of air pollution that's creating asthma and COPD and all kinds of health problems among our most challenged populations. So Transportation Climate Initiative is a very, very important initiative. The Republicans don't want it because they say there's going to be a regressive tax. Well, the regressive tax will be between 5 and 9 cents. In the last year, the cost of gas has gone from $2.16 up to $3.51. That's $1.35 in raise, and all that revenue went to the fossil fuel companies. TCI is saying for 5 cents a person, we will not only have all that money go back to the people of Connecticut, but it will unlock up to $1 billion for Connecticut from the federal government over 10 years. And this is what it will do. It will provide charging stations and public transport and transportation in rural areas, which is very important for people who often have old cars with bad mufflers, and we need to get them public transportation so that they're not using that. And the best of all is electric school buses. Just imagine if kids grow up knowing that the transportation that takes them to school every day is clean and something that they can be proud of. I've heard different numbers. The latest number is that 50% of the annual proceeds will assist communities overburdened by population and pollution. And I think that's terribly important. In the past, we have often passed legislation that helps communities that are already fine. And we don't put landfills in rich towns, and we don't put diesel trucks zooming through in rich towns. We tend to do that in underserved areas, and TCI will change that. These are the benefits. I'll let you read it for just a moment. I think the healthcare consequences are not to be underestimated. Those who say this is going to cost so much. Well, there's very good research that indicates that the healthcare costs of air pollution in our state are going to be way higher than the costs of TCI. And if we can put in this kind of action, we will be much better off. So what you can do, the first thing you can do is be in touch with your senator. Now, if you don't know who your senator is, you literally only need to Google who is my senator, and up will come an online directory where you just put in your zip code and they will tell you all the contact information for your particular senator. That's all you got to do. And this is a moment when it's really important. The other thing you can do is to urge friends and colleagues who live in the 11th district to call Senator Looney. Senator Looney is the most powerful man in Connecticut right now. He is the senator pro tem, and he has the power to bring TCI to a vote. And he keeps not doing it because it's his bargaining chip against the governor. But a state rep told me this week that if he got 10 letters, he would change his mind. And I'll tell you why. This is what you're going to say. Look at the second bullet point. Looney's peers need this bill. Young people are signing up to vote in droves, and they're signing up as unaffiliated. Unaffiliated is now the largest party in Connecticut. Now, there are a whole lot of Democrats who feel that if they can get through their primary, it's a skate into their job. Well, that's not going to be true if a whole lot of young people through the Sunrise Movement understand that Democrats don't have their back on the most important piece of legislation in their generation. So if you tell your friends who are at Yale or live in Hamden or anyone in the 11th district that you need them, really need them to tell Looney to get that vote done, it will have an impact. What we're hoping is that the double whammy of the governor hearing from 4,000 people that they need that bill. We didn't name the bill because it's a 501c3 venture and we can't name bills, but I as an individual can tell you that we want TCI passed, and I hope you will do it. So those are the things that you can do. I want to give you just a broad brushstroke of what the next steps are of the collaboration that I've been talking about. Talking about things, you learn a lot. It's really fun. You start talking about your commitment to something, and people come out of the woodwork that you would never expect. So I'm at a party last summer for a land trust in Maine, and I'm talking about this initiative. And the executive director of the land trust says, "Oh, Mally, do you know what we have in Maine? We have something called an Environmental Priorities Council." I said, "What's that?" She said 36 nonprofits get together twice a year to create a docket of legislation that they want passed in the legislature. And there are two dockets, one for the climate and one for other. And anybody can submit a bill for consideration. The 36 environmental nonprofits vote on it, and then they present between 3 and 9 pieces of legislation to the legislature, which represents 100,000 people in the state of Maine. That's more than 10% of the state. And guess what? All of their bills get passed. It's amazing. So here's Mally in Connecticut saying, "We need to talk with one voice. We need to talk with one voice." And there's the Environmental Priorities Council in Maine that's already figured this out. And it turns out that Oregon and Washington State also have Environmental Priorities Council. One of the things I've learned as I've been reading in social psychology is that people feel more comfortable with change when they know that other people are doing it too. It's called social proof. The easiest example of this that I can give you is a menu with 10 entrees. And if 3 are flagged as being most popular, those 3 entrees will be chosen 40% more times. So I come back to Connecticut and say, we need an EPC, an Environmental Priorities Council. And guess what? There's already one in Maine, and there's one in Washington State and in Oregon too. It gets much easier to persuade people when you're going to be the 4th pioneer instead of the first lone voice in the wilderness. So we are right now investigating this. It feels a little overwhelming, but it turns out there's a consortium of environmental nonprofits that already meet bi-weekly to talk about legislation. We need to help build trust among environmental nonprofits so that they agree to one docket. The only rule of the docket is that you can't take credit for something on that docket. It's the team that did it. You are allowed, if your piece of legislation doesn't get passed, you are allowed to continue advocating for that to the legislature, but it's just not on the primary, the environmental priorities docket. And I hope that within the 2 years that I'm giving this, we will be able to launch something of its same equivalence. So that's where we are. But I want to remind you of where you are. I'm hoping you will sign the postcard to the governor. I hope you will explore sustainable CT and get involved in your town. I hope you will write your senator and any New Haven friends. And I hope you will listen very carefully to the options for lowering your footprint that our next speaker, Mark Scully, is going to give you. I want to leave you with a thought that I received from Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who is the brilliant international oceanographer, who you may have heard at the Connecticut Forum, at the Climate Change Forum. She gets asked all the time, what should I do? What can I do? And she says, social action is based on a Venn diagram. There's what needs to be done, what are you good at, and what is your joy? And right in the middle of those 3 is what you should be doing. Now, some of you may be feeling blank when I say those 3 things. So let me tell you a story. My husband loves cars. He loves zippy, fast, stick shift, secondhand cars. But 2 years ago, he decided that he needed to join this effort, and he bought an electric vehicle. He loves it. it's fast, it's quiet, and it has no emissions. And he talks about it all the time. And guess what? He's convinced 4 other people, including our own senior pastor, to get an electric vehicle. And you can do the same thing. When you find your sweet spot between what is needed, what are you good at, and what brings you joy, you will have a power that you have never seen before. If you're a gardener, how about pollinator gardens in your local town park? If you're an engineer, you talk to Mark about what you could be doing in your town. If you're a lawyer, well, I won't go there. There are lots of things lawyers can do. But I hope you will find your joy, because we need all of us. Thank you. And that's it.
Did you want to take any questions now, Mally?
Sure, if there are any. Maybe there aren't any. Are there any?
Just a quick one. I assume we should also contact our representatives as well as our senators. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep. Yep. I mean, I just didn't want to load it up on you, but that would be wonderful. If you can do both, that would be great. Other questions? Okay.
Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I confess I've been really excited to be here tonight, and I think I've always held Asylum Hill in such high regard, and I think I'm also just looking forward to the chance to have a conversation with folks, and particularly with people of faith, about this issue that is so important to us all. Thank you, Mally, for your extremely cogent comments and really direction on things we need to be doing in Connecticut. I'll put a note in the chat that has my email. I've got some slides, and I've tried to create the slides in a way that has probably more information than you will want to or able to process as we're going along. I've got a lot of links and things in there, so feel free to reach out to me, or I'll be happy to provide these to the Asylum Hill team if they'd like to distribute them. But probably got more material than we're going to have time to cover, but and that may cause me to just jettison a few slides, because I really do want to leave time for some conversation. If you have a question of understanding, please raise your hand. And I'm not sure if I can see if somebody has their hand raised, but please somebody let me know if there's a question. If it's a question of or something of discussion or a give and take, let's hold that for later. But if there's something you don't understand, feel free to reach out. So I'd like to cover 3 things tonight. First of all, just a bit of scene setting on the climate crisis. What is it? And what are some ways that we can talk about it with people? And then the question, as we've heard tonight, we often feel so helpless. What can I do personally? And then what can my community do? So let's start with a little bit of scene setting on the climate crisis. What is climate change, first of all? It typically includes, we're talking about 2 things. It's global warming, which is caused by human emissions of greenhouse gases. Basically, as Bill McKibben says, the great experiment where we decided to dig up all the carbon in the ground and burn it. We started doing that in the Industrial Revolution. And the second part of climate change is this large scale shift in weather patterns. People often talk about climate change and then say, gee, look at the weather, and we can't really be dealing with climate change. Well, weather is the conditions at any point in time. We can predict the weather maybe for a couple of days or a week, whereas climate is essentially weather over a longer period of time. The other analogy that we like to use is weather is a card you pull from the deck. Climate is the deck of cards, and we are changing that deck itself. It's also good to understand that when we talk about greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect, there is a natural greenhouse effect. If we didn't have the natural greenhouse effect, we would not be able to live on this planet. That blanket of the greenhouse gases really keeps the temperature at a stable, at a livable level. But the problem is that we're putting too much into that blanket. And so we're changing this climate. One of the main reason that we're seeing climate change is this increase of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we've been measuring that in this Mauna Loa Observatory out in Hawaii for, I think, since 1958. And you can see the seasonal pattern, which is caused by the trees in the sort of the seasonal effect of trees, but you can clearly see a longer term trend. And people say, gee, but haven't there been increases and cycles over time? Yes, but if we go back and look at ice cores back, really, people have done this and dug and estimated what the CO2 levels were literally 800,000 years ago. You can see where we are today is entirely out of line with any of these natural cycles. Where we are today is roughly 414 parts per million. You may have heard of the organization 350.org, founded by Bill McKibben. That 350 number is the number beyond which life on Earth is believed to be not sustainable. So we're clearly at a very dangerous level already and rising, and not particularly affected by the pandemic even. So what does climate change lead to? Well, there are lots of effects, right? We talk about global warming, but it's really much more than that, right? There is the warming of the Earth's surface and the oceans, sea level rise, melting of Arctic ice, changes in precipitation pattern. We're going to see more rain, more extreme storms, more droughts, more heat waves, more extreme weather, stronger, more intense hurricanes, increased ocean acidity, lower oxygen levels. Parts of the Earth will become uninhabitable. So there's lots of, when we talk about climate change, we're not just talking about warming here or there. There are all these impacts that we can't really say that we're going to see them in the future. We are already seeing them today. And there is this really important issue of feedback loops and tipping points, which I'd like to talk about briefly. So mentioned surface temperatures. They're up 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. And you can see this change here. You've got both the surface and the water temperatures shown here. And they are clearly increasing. Again, you can ask the question, but gee, haven't there been cycles in the past? Yes, but you look at those cycles and where we are today in terms of global temperature, and we're just headed to we're at a very dangerous level and headed up. So it's clear that we're putting too much carbon into the air. It's leading to significant increases in temperature. And we talk about, there's a lot of talk about what level of temperature increase is sustainable. And a target that is often set is a 2-degree increase. And you might think, boy, what's 2 degrees? Does that really matter? Instead of a 68-degree day, it's going to be a 70-degree day. No big deal. But where we see the real impact of a change in temperature is really in what we call the tail of the distribution. You can see the blue sort of normal curve, the bell curve here is where the climate was, right? We have an average temperature. We have some very cold days on the left, and it's the lower incidence, a lower frequency of them. We have some very hot days on the right here. If you shift that whole curve over to the right, then yes, the average has gone up by a couple degrees. But more importantly, you've got this area over here where in the past we had extreme weather, hot weather in this small sort of triangular shape down here. Now we've got hot weather in a much bigger area. So you can see even a small shift in the temperature has a disproportionate increase in the amount of extreme weather, including events over here in this area that we never saw before, that were not in the distribution. And this sort of simplistic graph assumes the shape of the curve hasn't changed. We're just sliding it over to the right. But what we're probably seeing is also a change in the shape of that curve as well. So this small shift in temperature can have very significant impacts particularly on extreme events. there are these two concepts that I think are really important. And to be honest with you, I find them extremely scary. And they are feedback loops and tipping points. So a feedback loop is where changing one thing, it changes another, and that then changes something else. And eventually it changes the first thing. So it's a loop. So you can see this one that's shown up here. We've got an increase in temperature, and that leads to a thawing of the permafrost. That releases CO2, that leads to more temperature rise. So you have this feedback loop where it can just increase and feed upon itself. So that's a positive feedback loop. You can have negative feedback loops as well, where an example is here in the second bullet here. With warmer climate, we get more water in the atmosphere. That leads to more clouds. So less sunlight reaches the earth, and that's less warming. So that's where the feedback loop actually would be negative, and it would cause to actually subside or to mitigate that effect. But it's kind of scary to think that we can get into a situation where one change can feed on another, and before you know it, it can just go around and reach this next concept, which is called a tipping point, which is where, we think we understand all of, we have the best scientists in the world modeling these types of things, and we think we have a pretty good understanding of these. But what's really scary is that if one of these feedback loops just reaches a point where it accelerates and we can't stop it. And there are some really interesting examples of this. And to me, having worked in the insurance business for many years and done a lot of financial modeling, and all models are wrong, some are useful, and we think we have a pretty good understanding of these things, but some of the risks to these models we probably don't have a perfect understanding of. And that things like if Greenland fell into the ocean, what would we see? I'm going to show you a really interesting example. This was and this link is in the slides, and this was in the New York Times not too long ago, and it's a interesting graphic. So is it going to come up though? It doesn't appear to be. There we go. So this shows the patterns of the ocean, where the Gulf Stream, as you can see, it has shaped climate and history for 4 continents. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of this. Currents would swing west from Africa. It influenced weather patterns from Caracas to Miami to Europe. It hit the Caribbean. Warmer weather would sweep past the continents, turning into cooler water further north. That cooler water would carry the heat of the Caribbean up along the East Coast, and then back out into the Atlantic. And they're talking, and this is a very technical term we're going to throw at you here. They're talking about the cold blob, this mass of cold water that is gathering here. And the danger is that this is really from the melting of the glaciers and the ice in Greenland and Iceland, that could actually lead to a diminishing of this Gulf Stream. And this is an extremely delicate balance that could have absolutely catastrophic impacts. And the risk, in my way of thinking, is we just don't really have a full understanding of that. So the whole concept of feedback loops and tipping points is one that we need to pay attention to. I think it's good to be aware of them. So the question is, so that's kind of a real primer on climate change. What is it? What are some of the main impacts? So what can we do? And I'd like to cover sort of two areas. I think Mally covered some really interesting things that we can be doing in the state, some things that we need to be aware of and we need to advocate for. I'd like to start with talking about what we can do as individuals, what we can do personally, and then move on a little bit to what we can do at the town level. So starting with personally, we've come across this clean energy pledge that we like to share with folks and encourage people to consider making it part of our words to live by. And I won't read the whole thing, but essentially it's saying, I'm going to take steps today and I'm going to start to plan for some changes in my life. I'm going to inventory what fossil fuels I'm using. I'm going to look for ways to get off of those. There's a bunch of things I'm going to try to do in the next 6 months that may have no upfront costs and may save me some money. I'm going to work to develop this renewable economy. And whenever I do any work on my building, I want to consider what efficiency and renewable improvements I can make. So it's an example of a pledge that each of us could take. And now what I'd like to do, I think you all have seen the lists of, boy, they go back for decades, right? There was 50 ways to save the planet a long time ago. And this could be an absolutely exhaustive list, but I want to really highlight some that I think are particularly important, particularly doable, and have a focus on the energy that we use and the energy that we create and the impact that has on the environment. So I think the most important is home energy solutions audit, and I'm going to come back to that. And then any additions you're making, any improvements you're making to your building, you want to use that as a chance to weatherize. Consider purchasing electricity from a 100% renewable supplier, and I'll show you how we can do that. I think we've all been talking about light bulbs for a long time. If you haven't done so, LEDs are a great way to save money. As you replace your appliances, we should always be looking to get Energy Star. Consider replacing your hot water heater when it goes with a heat pump hot water heater. Plan your transition to heat pumps. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Explore solar and possibly even battery storage for your home. Use alternative transportation and plan for your next car to be an electric or a plug-in hybrid. Replace your gas stove with induction. Look at the climate impact of your diet. And perhaps most importantly, talk about climate change. So I'm going to go through most of these in a little bit more detail. Home energy solutions audits are, I trust that many of you have already done them. You can do them, if you haven't done one for 3 years, you can do another, but they're a great thing to do. They're highly subsidized. We pay for them by the charges that go into our to our electric bills. I think they're $50 right now if you are income eligible. So if your income is below certain levels, they're free, and they are the best deal in town. And they will come and they will do a series of activities. You will save money immediately. They'll actually change light bulbs that do things that have a high value to them. Your energy bills will go down immediately. You'll be using less energy, and there's really no reason why anybody should not be doing a home energy solutions audit. And I'd like to share with you a little video that our program manager from People's Action for Clean Energy recently created about.
Hi, this is Deb with PACE, and I just wanted to share the results of my recent home energy solutions audit that I had. And to tell you the truth, I wish I'd done it a lot earlier. The certified energized CT techs come out, and for $50 or sometimes even free, they do hundreds of dollars worth of work on your home. So here's what they did. One of the first things they did was a blower door test. The blower door test measures the air tightness of your home. Our house was pretty leaky. They checked the emissions on our old oil burner. They added weather stripping to our doors. They sealed all the nooks and crannies in our house. They even gave us new LED light bulbs. These simple fixes could save me as much as $600 a year. This HES audit is a bright idea. Hi, this is...
So you can see HES audit is really something that everybody should do. Our buildings, our homes, our residences are a huge source of greenhouse gases, and there tend to be so many efficiency improvements we can make. So the next thing for us to consider is take a look at your electric bill, and you'll see there is, you pay, you can see you pay supply and you pay delivery. Your supply, you get to, because we have a deregulated electricity market in Connecticut, you can choose your supplier. If you haven't done anything, you probably have the Eversource standard offering on there, but there are other companies that you could buy your electricity from. Eversource doesn't actually produce the electricity, right? They manage the grid, but there are a bunch of other companies that actually produce and then supply this electricity. So if you go in this next page, there's a link here. You can go into the Energize CT website and you can look up a list of alternate suppliers, and it'll tell you how much of their energy is renewable. A caution is to read the fine print. Some of these will have teaser rates, and you might find you got a great price for 6 months or a year, and then all of a sudden your rates have gone up. So one does want to be careful with this, but essentially by selecting a supplier that is using more renewable energy, what you're doing is you're creating demand for that renewable energy. So somewhere, somebody now needs to find renewable energy, and it may be in our region, it may be elsewhere, but essentially you're saying, I want to buy renewable energy, so you're creating demand for it. So this is one thing that any of us can do fairly easily, is to go to this website and look at what different companies are out there and select one that has, there are some that have 100% renewable energy and the rates are quite competitive. Another thing we can look at is when our hot water heater goes. I'm not saying we all need to go out and throw out our hot water heater today, but if and when yours goes, or you're making some kind of an addition or expansion, consider a heat pump hot water heater. Heat pumps, and we're going to talk about heat pumps to heat and cool your house as well. They move heat around. They don't create it. Think of your refrigerator, where it's essentially pulling the heat out of the refrigerator and putting it out into the room, into the back of your refrigerator. This does the same thing. So it's actually pulling heat out of the air in the space where it's located. And it does that through the typical refrigerant cycle, just like a refrigerator does. And so it pulls that heat out of the air and uses it to heat the water. Because they're not creating the heat, they are much more efficient. So they're 2 or 3 times as efficient as electric resistance heaters. And they're not burning any kind of a fossil fuel on site. Of course, the electricity that they use is created in part with fossil fuels, but our target in Connecticut is to get to a carbon neutral grid by 2040. So this is part of the solution, right? We want to get rid of fossil fuels on site. So I encourage you to consider a heat pump hot water heater. Two caveats are, if your basement is, if the location of your hot water heater is very cold, then it might not be a good choice, because essentially it's going to have to work too hard to get the heat out of the air to heat the water. Most basements, are generally conditioned. They may not be heated, but they're generally insulated, so they're okay. But if it's a very cold space, then it's not going to work. And the other thing, you wouldn't want to put it in the living space. Most people don't have their hot water heaters in their living space, in the kitchen or in the dining room, but they can be a little bit noisy. But there's really something worth considering when you need to replace your next hot water heater. Similarly, heat pumps are a wonderful solution for heating and cooling our homes. As I said before, heat pumps don't create heat. They don't burn anything to create heat. They move heat around. So a heat pump is a fantastic device, and it provides both heating and cooling. So in the winter, even if the air is cold outside, because of this compressor loop, this refrigerant cycle, where it's expanding the gas to a very cold level, so that it can pull the heat out of the air and then bring it inside and heat the space. And similarly, in the summer, even if it's very hot outside, we're able to pull the heat out of the inside of the building and put it outside. So heat pumps are fantastic devices. They are all electric. There are 2 types of heat pumps. There's an air source heat pump, which is finding the heat in the air outside and then bringing it inside. A ground source heat pump, or a geothermal is the same concept. It's the same heat pump technology, but it's finding that heat not from the air, but from a loop of water or a closed loop of some kind of a refrigerant or some liquid that it's pulling from the ground. So you drill wells or you have shallow trenches, and you're getting to a level under the ground where the temperature tends to be stable all year round. Heat pumps, and you can see the heading here is plan your transition to a heat pump. We're not saying you all need to go out and buy a heat pump tomorrow, right? Because a heat pump decision, HVAC systems are complicated. And, solar, when we talk about solar, pretty much anybody can look at their roof and make a decision about solar at any time. With heating and cooling systems, as soon as you start to have that conversation, there's a lot of questions. What do you have now? Is it gas? Is it oil? Do you have radiators? Do you have forced air? Do you have ducts? So it really, and what you don't want to do is wait until your furnace goes, right? Because typically it happens in the winter, and that's not the time when you're able to have a very relaxed conversation about what our next heating and cooling system be. So start today, inform yourself about heat pumps. You might be able to go ahead right away and put a heat pump in a portion of the house. You may have the great room in the kitchen where you spend 90% of your life, and you may want to use a heat pump to heat and cool that space. You may have a space that's currently not conditioned, and a heat pump might be a great solution for that. Maybe you're doing an addition, and that would be the time to improve to do some weatherization, but also bring in a heat pump. Or be ready that when the furnace goes, you've thought through what kind of a heat pump system would be appropriate for us. So our recommendation is sort of have a plan, learn about heat pumps, and be ready to sort of transition to this technology. There's a lot of misinformation about heat pumps, and the nonprofit that I'm involved in, People's Action for Clean Energy, is running campaigns with towns to help promote heat pumps. And there's a lot of resistance out there. People either have outdated information or just misinformation that people think heat pumps don't work in the cold, that they're loud. Neither of those is true. But it's a more nuanced and it's a more complicated conversation. So we encourage you to sort of familiarize yourself with heat pumps and be ready to make that transition. Solar, I think everybody's familiar with solar, but just a couple of quick ways that things that each of us can do. One thing is check your potential on this thing called Google Project Sunroof, and I'm going to go over to Google Sunroof right here, and there's a link in the slide. But if you Google Project Sunroof, you'll find it, and you can put in any address. So I've put in an address here, and it shows you an image of that house, and it shows you, so you can put in your monthly electric bill. It has a recommendation of how much solar you could fit on the roof. This is an 8.5 kilowatt array. It shows you your estimated savings over 20 years. And of course, the environmental impact, how much carbon dioxide would be offsetting. It talks about financing. So anybody can put in their address, and it's a really interesting site. And you can see, if I just zoom out a little bit, different houses have different color because based on the degree of solar isolation and how good their sun is. So the brighter yellow have particularly good exposure. Zoom back in a little so you can see that a little better. The darker ones you can see are a little more shade, but try going to Google Project Sunroof and put in your address and see what they recommend. And then it's very easy to get quotes on solar. There are a couple of options for financing them. You can, of course, buy it outright. You can do what's called a power purchase agreement, which is really where, for no money down, someone else installs, buys, maintains, insures the solar panels, and you just agree to buy your electricity from them. And invariably, that will be at a lower rate than you're paying today. So if you do have good sun, then it's a pretty good case that you can get a power purchase agreement and immediately, so with no money down, and immediately be paying less for your electricity. There's also a thing called solar leases. And I've got a couple links here. The Green Bank has a lot of good information on financing programs. They also have a approved list of solar installers. So if you click on the link and go there, you can see, you can get a list of people who service your area. And there's a bunch of good, very reputable companies providing solar out there. You can see the different options you can get. You can put it on your roof. You could get a tracker that moves and tracks the sun, points east in the morning and points and sort of moves during the day, points west in the afternoon. Or you could go sort of the retro look with this post and beam structure over some kind of a carport. So if you haven't looked into solar, they're really one of the good things that has happened in the whole environmental space over the last years is the price of solar has come down so much. So if you do have, if your roof isn't too old and you don't have too much shade, chances are you could get solar with something like a 7-year sort of payoff. So we've heard about how exciting electric vehicles can be, how quiet, how zippy they are. So again, it's not that everybody needs to go out tomorrow and buy an electric vehicle, but inform yourself, be ready so that when you're ready to get that next vehicle, you might know which one you want to get. Electric vehicles have come really far in the last few years. The lifetime cost of many cars, there's a wonderful graphic that there's an article in the New York Times, and it shows you here the vertical axis is how much carbon or your carbon dioxide emissions. So the higher on the scale here are the dirtier vehicles, the lower ones are the cleaner. And the horizontal scale along here is your average cost, your lifetime costs per month. So it's the purchase price, it's maintenance, it's fuel. So the ones at the bottom here, of course, have lower carbon emissions. Those are your electrics. Up here are more your diesels and your gasoline powered cars. But on the left-hand side here are the less expensive. So you can see there are a bunch of EVs that are not only low emission, they're also less expensive, or at least very competitive over the lifetime of the vehicle. So, and I think we're pretty close already to that tipping point where there are electric cars available that, if you look at the lifetime cost, they are actually less to operate. And that's only going to get better as more and more auto manufacturers are turning their attention to EVs. The researchers are turning their attention to batteries. Even without a massive breakthrough in batteries, the incremental improvements in batteries are going to make EVs extremely competitive in the years ahead. And as folks who've had one can attest, electric vehicles used to be, they didn't go far, they didn't go fast, they were kind of funny looking, but now they're very quick. They have a very respectable range. They're extremely safe, and they're quieter, of course. One thing that we might want to consider doing is just to get an understanding of what your carbon footprint is. And I think the overall number maybe doesn't mean so much, but to kind of look at, well, what are the things in my life that are causing my carbon footprint? So there are lots of websites. I've given a link here of one where you can go in and answer some questions, and it estimates what your carbon footprint is. And more importantly, where you can see, well, how much of that is coming from travel and how much of that is coming from food and services and goods. The statistics show that the average carbon footprint for an American citizen, a US citizen, is 16 tons of greenhouse gas. Globally, the average is more like 4. So we are much more consumptive than the rest of the world. Part of that is we're a bigger country. We have more distances in transportation, but our consumption and our waste, I think, contributes to that. Some of the experts say we really need to get that down to 2 tons. So massive changes that we need to find ways of making in our carbon footprint. Part of that is from the food that we eat. And this is coming from somebody who has over my lifetime been a committed carnivore. But I've increasingly really been swapping meat out of my own diet and looking at plant-based substitutes, and particularly beef. You can see beef has just the highest footprint of pounds of CO2 per serving. So it's really far and above. Even if we just cut beef out of our diet, a day or two a week or something, really going to have a significant impact. So I think a lot of people, I know somebody challenged me a few years ago and said, how can you be an environmentalist and eat meat? And I didn't have a good answer, but I think I'm gradually coming around to this and finding, the good thing about this is one doesn't have to make great sacrifices anymore. There are so many really good substitutes out there. So I think diet is something we want to consider. You may have heard of Catherine Hayhoe. Catherine is a climate scientist from Texas Tech. She's also an evangelical Christian. She's got a new book called Saving Us, and she's just delightful to listen to. There's a link here to a TED Talk that she's given. And one of her messages is that the most important thing we can do about climate change is talk about it, why it matters, how we can fix it, and to use our voices. And some of the advice that she gives, and this comes right from her book, are when you're talking to someone, start with something you have in common. Connect to why climate change matters to us personally, not to the human race in its entirety or the earth itself, but as individuals, right? So we're not sort of preaching about grand schemes. It's like, gee, climate change matters to me because I like to fish, or I like to ski, or I love my state and its natural beauty. So sort of connect with somebody about things that are personal, and then describe to people what can and is being done to fix it. And so I encourage you, to look at Catherine Hayhoe's TED Talk. Her book is delightful. And I think one of the things we can all do, we're all a part of conversations with, often it's the relatives over Thanksgiving, or friends who raise doubts, or will perhaps even deny some of the science of climate change. And I think, as Catherine says, to speak to that and to talk about it is with people who we are close to is probably one of the most important things we can do. Another thing we can do personally, I don't know if there's anybody in this group who falls into the seniors group. I think from looking at the Zoom screen before, it looked like everybody was pretty young. But I know Bill McKibben has written recently that there is a group that is not pulling its weight, and it's a group that he is now a part of. Call us the experienced Americans, the baby boomers and silent generations that make up a huge percentage of population, own a remarkable share of its financial assets, and vote in large numbers. So he started a new organization called Third Act. And I encourage you to take a look at what they're doing, because really it is folks who have their careers behind them. They have all these skills. They've got training. They've had careers that have prepared them for advocacy, for organization, for all kinds of skills. They often have some financial assets. They vote, and this is a group that really can accomplish a great deal. So I encourage you to consider a third act in your life when you get to that point. So those are some things that we can do personally. And I'd like to just talk, I think with my work from PACE, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit just about what we can do as communities. This is the focus of PACE's work. I don't think I need to explain in detail why we should act locally, but we've seen it at PACE again and again and again, that a group of citizens, the quote, the wonderful quote from Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. These are people who, they know their leaders, they know the director of public works, they can sit down, they can go before the town council, We're not talking about grand schemes. We're talking about a solar array on that municipal building. We're talking about specifics. And we truly have seen it again and again and again. The groups of clean energy task forces, sustainability teams get tremendous things done, things that can really only be done at the local level. And I love this example from my hometown of Simsbury, where the bottom graph shows how much solar we cumulatively have installed in town. And you can look at that graph and see, well, gee, something happened in 2014, right? We were poking along at a slow rate, and all of a sudden, a bunch of solar got put online in 2014. Well, no mystery. That was the year we did this Solarize campaign. So campaigns and local initiatives can have a real impact. And we talked about some lifestyle choices. We can, as Mally said, we can talk about straws. We can even talk about getting meat out of our diet. But there really is this gorilla in the room, and that is our civilization's reliance on fossil fuels for energy and transport. We need to get ourselves off of fossil fuels. So what I would like to present in this section is a vision. And this is really the work of PACE, People's Action for Clean Energy. I think it really came out of a sense, a little bit of frustration, that when you look at the pace of change, when you look at things like Transportation Climate Initiative failing before the General Assembly for political reasons, when you look at a shared solar program that would enable people to put solar, to take part in solar that isn't on their own roof, but is a larger array that they can tap into. And it took years to get a small pilot. And now we have a program, but it has small. So you look at the pace of change and it's just so slow, and we look at where we have to go. And so we really started to say, well, where do we need to get to? What is that end state? What does it look like? And so we have this 100% clean, renewable energy vision. And the key elements are, first of all, efficiency. Right? We use way too much energy. Our buildings are way too inefficient. Our vehicles, our lifestyle is just very inefficient. And without reducing the actual amount of things that we do, we can be much more efficient. So efficiency is a huge part of that. Second is electrification. We essentially need to electrify everything. And we need to stop burning coal, oil, gas, and switch to vehicles and to heat pumps that run entirely off of electricity. Eventually, when we have enough renewables on the grid, all we're doing is really moving electrons around. We're creating electrons from the sun, from the wind, and then we're using them to power our cars, power our heat pumps, power our lifestyle. The third chevron, the third pillar here is renewables, right? We have the technology that we need, right? We have solar, we have wind, we have particularly offshore wind coming in significant numbers to the Northeast. And we're going to need, it's not all going to be in our towns, but we're going to need a mix of local and regional sources. And finally, we need to address justice as we're making these changes. Vulnerable communities, underserved communities, bear a disproportionate share of the burden of the impact. They were the least cause of many of this climate change. And so as we address solutions, we need to prioritize the equitable access to things like efficiency and clean energy. So in this 100% clean energy economy, we're going to be using less energy. It's going to be all electric, some of it local, some of it regional. Everything, transportation, heating, and cooling is going to be electric. And the grid will be resilient, and it will support our local distributed resources. Our work at PACE has been very influenced by Professor Mark Jacobson of Stanford University. You can see his book here, 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything. He has literally done the math and shown that we can power our society from wind, water, and sun. I encourage you to take a look at some of his, there's a video that he's done here as well. You can see here, this is this picture of Mark is when we invited him to Hartford in November 2018, and we presented him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Another inspiration for us has been a group called Rewiring America, Saul Griffith. And he's got a new book called Electrify, an optimist playbook for our clean energy future. By the way, the link here, this field manual for the climate fight, is a slightly shorter version of his book. I think the field manual came out first, and that's free, that's online, and then he just came out with the book. But he's also done extensive research on the type of appliances, the type of devices we're going to need, and how we simply have to electrify everything and how we can do it. Very briefly, this graph shows how we're going to transition to a clean energy economy. So this is a waterfall chart, and the bars on the left build up our current energy usage. So PACE would work with the town, and we'll put together this type of analysis. So I extend an invitation to any of you in your towns. We'd be happy to do this if we haven't done that already for your town. So we look at how much electricity the town uses, how much gas for heat, how much oil for heat. We convert it all to 1 unit of gigawatt hours and add it up. And that's how much energy the town is currently using in a year. And then we talk about reducing that through efficiency and electrification. So we can come down from that 887 all the way down to 354 by switching to electric vehicles, by switching to heat pumps, by weatherizing our homes. And then some of that we can site in town locally, and some of that we're going to need from the grid. So really it's taking stock of how much energy we're using today, how much can we reduce it by, and then how much of that are we going to site locally. So before we start to look at how much energy we're going to produce, we reduce it. So first reduce through efficiency and electrification, and then produce. The other way of looking at that is, here we are on the left-hand side of this graph today, and almost all of our energy comes from non-renewable sources. Over time, if we don't do anything, there probably will see a slight decrease in the energy that we would use. But if we get serious about efficiency and electrification, you can see this wedge is how much we're going to reduce our energy usage by. And then over time, as we deploy more renewables, both locally and regionally, we're going to essentially be replacing the non-renewables. So in the end, we're using much less energy, and it's all going to be renewable. And you can see the non-renewables are getting squeezed out by efficiency, electrification from above, and by deploying renewables from below. We've done the math on what it would look like if we actually did what I'm just saying. And this graph actually shows, so for this town, this town spends something like $78 million a year on energy. If we don't change anything, we could continue for the next 30 years spending $78 million every year on energy. We're literally burning that money each year. If instead we started to build solar, transition to electric vehicles, transition to heat pumps, then over time, the amount that we're spending on fuel, this red portion, would go down. It would start at that 78, but then go down. And we have to spend some money to build the renewables, to build the grid, to electrify everything. But over time, you can see our energy consumption would go way down, and we would actually end up saving money. And as I said, as we do this, we really need to be thinking about environmental justice. The vulnerable population groups are typically the ones that have least contributed to climate change. We can say that locally. We can say that globally, whether these are underserved countries or communities. They bear a disproportionate share of its impact. There are these communities, where are the power plants located? Where is the mining located? These are the vulnerable populations. Look at the housing conditions of these communities. They're the least efficient. They have the least control over their energy usage. Often they can't control it, or they don't have the ability to actually make improvements. And they have the limited access to things like weatherization or solar or EVs. So as we transition to this new economy, we have the opportunity to actually address many of these. So we need to identify and prioritize these underserved communities. We need to mitigate the barriers to access, things like efficiency program and weatherization. This document here from DEEP, Department of Energy Environmental Protection, addresses the barriers to energy efficiency from underserved groups. And we need to not only remove these barriers, but as we're designing programs, we need to make sure we're reflecting the priorities and the lived experiences of these groups. And here are a few examples of some groups that are doing this in Connecticut today. So how do we get there? This is the PACE 100% CT project, which if your town's not already engaged, we'd love to work with you. Essentially, if you don't have a group like a clean energy task force or a sustainability team, first step is build your team. We'll help do some of that baseline analysis. We'll help you put together an energy plan, reach out to the community, get folks involved, get business involved, get the municipality involved, and then get going on some of these building blocks of this new economy. A couple of resources that are available. This one on the left is on our website, and it's got these different pieces of the whole path to 100% renewable energy. You click on any one of those and you'll find a bunch of resources, including articles and links and presentations and case studies. And this thing on the right is a handbook that we have just written for towns to help them transition to this new economy. This is actually slated for release later this year. And this was a bit of, I don't know if we can call it good news, but this was just in the paper literally two days ago. And I think it's a bit of good news, but we don't want to get too confident. Essentially, what this shows is our historical emissions of greenhouse gases up to this point. And before the Paris Agreement, this was the path that we were on. And you can see it's not a line, it's a range, right? But we were on a fairly high path of greenhouse gas emissions. The policies that have been adopted since Paris actually bring us to this range of greenhouse gas emissions. That is actually a really big drop. So it shows that policies can have an impact. We can change this. We actually have seen that. If you go beyond that, what's actually been pledged, it will go further. It's still not enough. We have more to go. We need to do much more. But I think we could take a little encouragement that policies can actually have an impact, and they are having an impact. People often ask, are we going to succeed? You know, do you have hope? And I really like to live by these words of one of my idols, Wendell Berry, and I'm going to let him speak it.
We don't have a right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only question we have a right to ask is, what's the right thing to do? What does this earth require of us if we want to continue to live on it?
I think those are words that I can live by and we can all live by. We don't know whether we're going to succeed. For many of us, we won't know in our lifetime, but there is so much that we can do and we must do. So I'll leave this slide in here. This is contact information for me and my esteemed colleague, Bernie Pelletier. And we'd love to continue the conversation with you both now. I didn't leave a lot of time, but love to have some conversation now, and feel free to reach out to us going forward.
Bravo, Mark. My goodness, you have given us a very big gift this evening. That is a remarkable presentation. Is there a way that you can share that slide deck with Asylum Hills so that we can go through it at our leisure?
Absolutely, absolutely. I can. I will email that to you, and if anybody wants me to send it to them directly. But yes, absolutely.
The one question I have is that electrification. It depends on how the electricity is created, right? I mean, right now, how is the electricity created mostly in Connecticut, and what needs to happen in order for us to feel terrific about electrification?
We get our electric, I mean, that's a great point. And when people talk about electric vehicles or heat pumps, they're still running off of electricity that's produced in part with fossil fuels. So they're not fossil fuel free, but it's a part of the solution. So Connecticut gets its energy, like many places, from a mix of sources, about half nuclear, increasing amount of natural gas. Connecticut has, through its integrated resource plan, a target, and through the executive order from Governor Lamont, the target of having a carbon-free grid by 2040. The only concern that we've been raising about that pledge, about that target, is that it's 100% clean energy purchased by Connecticut. It's not all produced in Connecticut. We could end up by purchasing Quebec hydro and large-scale solar from other places, but still have a bunch of natural gas power plants running in Connecticut. So what we really want is a commitment to produce 100% clean grid in Connecticut by 2040.
Okay.
And the cool thing about owning an electric car is as the grid gets cleaner, your car gets cleaner.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Any other questions? Be bold. These are an amazing resource.
I know it was a bit of a fire hose. It was a lot of
It's a lot to take in. Yeah, Christy.
When I've brought up the clean renewables, I've been pushed back with the idea of the batteries that it takes to store this energy and how bad the batteries are. Could you help me with that argument?
I'm not an expert at this, and I know there are some issues with lithium mining. Right? I mean, the predominant type of battery used these days is lithium ion, and it will be, I think, unless there's any kind of a breakthrough. I'm not an expert, and I believe there are concerns about how lithium is mined in some places, and I think maybe cobalt is a concern as well. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed, right? We don't want blood lithium or blood cobalt. We want this to be done responsibly and sustainably.
There's no such thing as perfect. I will tell you that there's a new company in California that is taking Tesla batteries that are no longer strong enough to generate what the car needs, and making them into generators for homes. So I think there's going to be a whole secondary market for batteries that will be really exciting. And so there you are. Nothing's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate in that as I said, the price of solar panels has come down like 90% over the last decade. It's unbelievable. The cost of wind has come way. Wind is actually the cheapest form of energy right now. We're on the cusp of a revolution in offshore wind on the east coast of the United States. You know, we're fortunate that we have a fairly shallow shelf. You can go out a ways, and the shelf is shallow. Whereas out on the West Coast, we'll probably see more floating wind turbines, but we're going to see significant deployments of wind energy off the coast in the East. And batteries, the cost of battery storage has come down dramatically. And that's, I think, one of the biggest fears of the whole fossil fuel industry. If we can store energy, then intermittent renewables are possible, right? The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, but if you combine that with storage, and I think already solar and storage, utility scale solar and storage is cheaper than these things called peaker plants, where you've got a plant ready at any point to be able to support the grid. So there's a lot of good things are happening on the technology side. Mark Jacobson says we have 95% of the technology we need to make this transition. So we don't need breakthroughs.
Mally, maybe I can speak up here simply to say thank you to you both. I've been asked to do that, and I do it with delight, because as I've listened tonight, I think you've informed us, given us a much better understanding of the picture. You've energized and motivated us, and most importantly, you've given us a to-do list from yours, Mally, working to get this bill passed in December, to all of the ideas, Mark, you've provided. And I, for one, certainly want to get your slides. I'm hoping that the Justice and Action Committee will create a task force to take this seriously, to talk about what we can do, not only individually, but as a group. I hope we can spread the word throughout our church. We've got a wonderful congregation, and I think we might have another forum. We haven't figured out, obviously, what we'll do, but I think we've got to use your material, and we've got to spread the word. You've got me thinking about West Hartford, where I live. I don't know what the situation in West Hartford is. I would say I've got a Prius plug-in that's not quite as exciting as Jim's is, but it's one I just love. It's quiet. I spend $180 a year on gas, and I just love driving it. So I would encourage you all to consider that as well. I just think it's been a wonderful evening. I'm hoping that when you hear back from us in a year, if not 6 months, we can convince you we've moved out of the movable middle and are on the road to something much better. I think together we can get there. Individually, we can feel lost and wonder what to do, but you've given us a nice picture tonight with your slides, which I'm eager to get and eager to share with others in the church and beyond. So thank you both very much. I hope we can be in touch with you, Mark, more. If West Hartford's not where they need to be, I'm hoping to connect you with them, et cetera. So let's all take this on. And when the Justice and Action Committee meets next, I hope we can talk very seriously about what we can do collectively to move the ball forward. Great evening. Thanks so much. We really have appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
I think that allows us to move on. Is that right? If we're all done here. So
Yep.
Nice evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark and
Good night.
Mally, thank you so
night.
very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mark and Mally.
Nice
It
to
was
see you all.
wonderful.
Thanks.
Really good.
We should have a race, who can get the most